Okay, it's right on time, 6:30. Hello, I'm Dr. Julie Rems-Mario. I am a white woman with my hair pulled back. I have glasses, a black jacket, a blue shirt. My background has a painting with stripes on the side. And I'm so excited to be having this presentation with Dr. Kristin Vogel-Campbell. And before we go on, I just want to share about our nonprofit CoFusion group, which I am very proud to be a part of. It's pretty new and exciting. We have a lot of opportunities. CoFusion is a nonprofit organization with a mission to support educators and communities with our journeys and our goals. So it's a transformative change, and I encourage all of you to visit our website. It's www.cofusiongroup.org in order to learn more about what we do. And hopefully you all can partner with us and lock our arms together, shoulder to shoulder, to work for the greater impact. So now I would like to then introduce my partner, my CoFusion colleague and co-founder, Dr. Maha Jacobs.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you join our Brave Heart Circle conversations this evening. I'm Dr. Maha Jacobs. To visually describe myself, I'm brown-skinned. I'm wearing a red blouse speckled with small dark burgundy flowers. I have a red scarf wrapped around my face, and I'm wearing eyeglasses with pink rims. My background is blurred. It's a blurred view of my room. And so before we start, I would like to introduce Dr. Kristin Vogel-Campbell, who has over 20 years of experience in education, focus on special education. She is a transformative leader and an author of the book Parenting with Culturally, Linguistically Diverse Families in Special Education. We are honored to have Dr. Vogel-Campbell share with us some of her knowledge and experiences in the field. So to get us started, I would like to ask you to hold all questions to the end. You can also share your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will capture it to ask at the end of the presentation. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and I will now turn it to Dr. Kristin Vogel-Campbell.
You, Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Rems-Mario. I am very excited to be here tonight. A visual description of myself: I am a white woman wearing glasses with an asymmetrical haircut. I am wearing a black t-shirt. You might see me gesture a lot, so you might notice I have tattoos on both arms, and my background is a fall foliage watercolor with the CoFusion logo in the top right-hand corner. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get started with the presentation. One moment. All right. So yeah, and so again, thank you all for joining us tonight. In order to access closed captioning, please click More and then the Captions button on the menu at the bottom of your screen. And as you can see, we have our amazing American Sign Language interpreters who will be supporting with interpretation throughout the presentation. And as Dr. Jacobs had said, there will be time at the end for Q&A. It is an accessibility piece for me, as I have anxiety, and it supports a better flow of the presentation. Thank you. So yeah, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat using one, some, or all of the following prompts: your name, your pronouns, your role, your school or your district, and then what brings you here today. And then hopefully we will be able to meet your expectations in learning more about special education for school site administrators. All right. So I don't need to really go into a lengthy description of my work and the work that I do. Dr. Jacobs has covered a bunch of it. But it is very important that I acknowledge that I am joining this presentation tonight from the unceded ancestral lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples in the city that we refer to as San Francisco. And that my hope is that our learnings and wonderings tonight honor and reflect the history and legacy of the Ohlone peoples as we work and advocate for equity and social justice for all of us. And as Dr. Jacobs had mentioned, I am the author of Partnering with Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Families in Special Education, which was published last December by Rowman and Littlefield. And Dr. Jacobs, I know you have access to these slides. Would you be able to put the hyperlink to the book in the chat? I might ask you a few times during our conversation tonight.
Absolutely, I'll do that.
Yeah, thank you. And I serve as a consultant with the CoFusion group, as well as sit on the executive board for the Family, School, and Community Partnerships Special Interest Group for the American Educational Research Association. All right. And Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Rems Mario already described CoFusion, and I put the link to the website in the chat as well. It's our hope that you will sign up for any newsletters or any future professional development offerings that we launch. So here's our agenda for tonight. First, we are going to briefly do an overview of special education in the United States, understanding the notice of procedural safeguards, and then best practices for principals or school site administrators to start the school year. And then what your roles and responsibilities are as an administrator during IEP meetings. All right, so first, a brief history of special education in the United States. So before passage of the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, what we today refer to as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, only 20% of children identified with a disability attended public schools. There were some states that explicitly forbade students with disabilities from attending public schools. As students with physical and mental disabilities were viewed as unsightly and a burden to schools and a financial cost. So the EACHA was a game changer in that it required states to assess students for special education services, provide those services in the least restrictive environment, or LRE, and provided oversight and accountability, and also provided federal funding for the development and implementation of these programs. But I think it's very important to note that since 1975, 49 years, To date, the federal government has never fully funded IDEA or special education programs, leaving these extra costs to states and districts. So we have a very wide equity issue right off the bat. How can schools and school districts and states provide these services and this oversight if they're not receiving the federal funding that was mandated by the IDE? Something to think about. Now we're going to shift into understanding the notice of procedural safeguards. So if you've been part of an IEP meeting before, you're probably familiar with the document that school teams are required to provide to parents at the beginning of every IEP meeting, which outlines the rights of a parent of a disabled student, as well as the rights of that disabled student. Many educators are unfamiliar with the content of this document. So we are going to review the sections where the most questions arise. And generally, this document is 19 pages long in English and about a size 12 to 14 font. So there's a lot of information in here. And most recently, a review of procedural safeguards was enacted, and this document is written at about a 10th grade reading level in English. So it's not completely accessible for folks who even understand and can read the English language. So Dr. Jacobs, on this slide in the slide deck, could you please put the link in the chat to the website that houses over 30 versions of the California procedural safeguards? It's hyperlinked in that on the bottom of this slide. So when can parents receive a copy of the procedural safeguards? So at the beginning of a child's special education career, whenever a parent is provided an assessment plan to assess their child, whenever a parent asks, as well as whenever there's a change in the placement of the student with disabilities. But what I advise site administrators is whenever you have a meeting with families, provide them the copy of that document. And the website that Dr. Jacobs has linked in the chat is run by the state special education local planning area, or SELP, S-E-L-P. Right. So tonight we will be reviewing the following sections of the procedural safeguards. And I'm not going to name all of the ones that are on this slide. We will just go through. And again, I encourage you, if you have any questions that come up, please put them in the chat. If time permits at the end, we will start to answer questions. And if we don't have time, we will get back to you with the answers to the questions. So participation in the IEP process. So what administrators need to know is that parents have the right to participate in meetings. And they have a right to audio record IEP meetings. And they need to provide at least 24 hours notice that they're going to record. Generally, when a parent asks to audio record, the site administrator or a district representative will also audio record the meeting so that our records match the records of the parent. We're in an age where we have IEP meetings over Zoom, and it's important to note that video recording of IEPs is not permitted. So if there's a way to only record the audio, that's the way to do it. But we can't record straight from Zoom because we'll be recording people's faces and their likenesses. And there are protections for folks that we're not allowed to video record. Also, if a parent wants to ask for an IEP meeting, the school and the school administrator has 30 days to schedule and hold that IEP meeting. So it's important for administrators to remind their staff that they need to inform the site administrator as soon as there's a request for an IEP meeting. Moving on to timelines. Dr. Jacobs, there's also a link to there's a link at the bottom of this slide entitled Special Education Timelines in California. Dr. Jacobs will put this in the chat, and this is an important handout for you to have hanging somewhere near your desk, and to also hand this to your special education staff so that they're aware of all of the timelines that we need to abide by. So the basic rule that we have in California and in the United States is 15, 30, 60. 15 calendar days to respond to a request, and then 30 days to schedule an IEP meeting upon a parent request, and 60 days to complete an assessment cycle and hold an IEP meeting. And that document will give you a lot more information that'll be very helpful to make sure that not only your school and district stay in compliance, but that we're also meeting the promise of the families that we work with. Parent consent. So in order for an IEP to be implemented, parents must consent to the document, and it must be written consent. So a lot of times at the end of an IEP meeting, parent might notify or say or have it interpreted, yes, I agree with this. Then the team needs to follow up to get a written signature or an e-signature, either through DocuSign or through any other means where we can verify that the parent has provided that written consent. Parents can also revoke consent at any time. And generally, if you are the site administrator and you get a message from one of your staff saying that a parent is revoking consent for special education services, I would pick up the phone or find time to connect with the parent to get an understanding of what their concerns are. But at the same time, services need to stop and it needs to be documented. Assessments. So a student must be assessed in all areas of suspected disability. And the assessment tools that your school team uses must not, they must be vetted by the state, by their professional boards. They cannot be discriminatory based on race, culture, sex, or gender. We have in the state of California, currently, Black or African American students cannot be assessed for using intellectual assessments because those assessments have been found to be discriminatory against Black and African American students. Assessments must be administered in a child's native language. If a child is bilingual, if they speak Spanish in the home or another language, that assessment must be in Spanish and in English. If the student uses American Sign Language, the assessment must be administered using American Sign Language. And it goes for any other language. There are some assessments that are not normed in particular languages. So, for example, indigenous languages from Mexico, but the district must make every attempt to have an interpreter there to interpret the assessment. And then the assessor must make sure that that is noted in their assessment report. We could go on for another hour about multilingual assessments, but I would advise you to ask your school psychologist or your special education department if you have questions about multilingual assessments. And the assessments also need to be multifaceted. So if a student is being assessed for specific learning disability, more than one measure must be used because the assessor will look at the particular tests and see if there is commonality in order to determine if a student requires special education services. So student records. So a parent can request records at any time. And if a parent requests records, this is when you should have the contact information for your special education representative, your program specialist. Let them know that a request has been made. In some districts, special education records are maintained at the district office. So it will be a collaboration between your school and the district office to get the records within 5 business days of the request. You can absolutely get them to the parents sooner. I'm sure they would appreciate it, but you have 5 business days per law. And so another acronym that you might be familiar with is IEE, which is an independent educational evaluation. So a parent may disagree with part or some of an assessment that the school or district conducts, and they have up to 2 years to request an independent education evaluation at the district expense. So say a occupational therapy assessment was conducted and the school occupational therapist states that the child is not eligible for services. Parents can ask for an IEE, and the district, this is when you connect with your district folks. The district must respond in writing within about, I would say, 2 to 4 weeks, either funding that evaluation or filing stating that their evaluation is valid. Most of the time, when a parent requests an IEE, the district will fund that evaluation. And this is where we get into some funny legal language. And this is where I'm going to air quote. So for those of you that are utilizing interpretation, I wanted to give you that visualization. The law says within a reasonable amount of time. That's why recent rulings from special education judges have determined reasonable amounts of time to be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. All right. Dr. Jacobs, there is another hyperlink at the bottom of the screen. And Dr. Jacobs will put another link in the chat to the California Department of Education website, which will have a list of family empowerment centers and parent training information centers. So we want to make sure that we have a open and welcoming relationship with parents. So if a parent has a question about their child's IEP or a concern, they come to their school team first. There are other options and other resources that are available to families. They can connect with district staff, such as a program specialist, director of special education, or they may connect with someone from the county office of education. For one reason or another, if that welcoming environment has not always been in place, some parents don't have we have not earned their trust. If there is a question about a student's IEP, they might seek out legal aid. They may seek a private advocate. Or they might seek out one of these family empowerment centers that are listed here. And that's it. If a parent has an advocate or someone that is assisting and helping them, it doesn't automatically mean that the school team is doing something wrong. Sometimes this is a historical trend. Maybe they had a negative experience in their school. Maybe the child's previous school or the doctor said something that did not resonate about their child. That parents have the right to seek out independent assistance if they have any questions. All right, we're getting close to the end of procedural safeguards. So I talked a little bit before about prior written notice. So this is a written notice if a parent requests an IEE, if a parent requests a change of placement, or if the district is declining a request or is looking to change placement. This is a document that is generally written and drafted by someone with special education experience. Sometimes it's your school psychologist. Many times it is a special education administrator with the district office. Generally, you will not be tasked with writing this document, but for your information, asking what a prior written notice or a PWN looks like so that you know when the school district needs to respond with this written response. All right, the final section about procedural safeguards, I think, is one of the most important regarding discipline of disabled students. So students who have IEPs are not exempt from school-related discipline. However, they have additional rights and protections. If a student with an IEP is nearing their 10th day of suspension during a school year, the school team must convene for a special IEP meeting called a manifestation determination, or MD. And this meeting determines the answers to two questions. One, if the student's behavior that led to the suspension occurred because of a failure of implementation of the IEP, and two, if the behavior that led to the suspension was connected to the student's disability. So, for example, a student who has dyslexia is suspended for vaping in the bathroom. Generally, I would say that there's not a connection between their reading disability and their choice to vape in the bathroom. On the other hand, if you have an autistic student who is suspended for fighting or hitting another person, that's when the school psychologist needs to do a more thorough investigation into the incident, what led to the student hitting or fighting with the other person. And then the team needs to have a discussion if that was related to their autism. I've been in situations where the team has decided that it is. And I've also been in situations where the entire team has decided that it's not. But it's very important that that conversation needs to happen. If the IEP team determines that the suspension is not related to their disability, discipline process can continue, including expulsion. But that happens very infrequently. But whenever there is a MD meeting, there should be an adjustment to the student's IEP to address the behavior, either through a behavior plan, potential additional assessments, and so on. There are several other sections of the procedural safeguards that are very, very important. In my 20 years of experience in special education, these are the sections that come up infrequently, but there is still very much value to these. And I am more than happy to share with this group afterwards, kind of like a brief bullet point or a summary of these particular sections, because I do not want anyone to feel that they are less valid or less important. Moving on, best practices for principals or assistant principals, vice principals, any school site administrator during the school year. At the beginning of the year, it's extremely important to get your contacts for your the special education department. In some districts, a program specialist or a teacher on special assignment supports individual schools with their special education programs. They are going to be your resource for special education. And then I would also make sure that you ask for access to whatever special education database your district uses so that you can view their IEPs. In California, two of the more frequent databases are SACE, SEIS, or CIRAS, SIRAS. So you will know which one your district uses, but as a site administrator, you should have view access to those. And again, I would, before the beginning of the school year, I would meet with your special education team, get the contacts for any staff that support more than one school. So say that your occupational therapist is on site 1 or 2 days a week. Make sure that you have that person's email and their cell phone if that is something that they are comfortable sharing with you. And then I would also review procedures and timelines with your staff and encourage your school staff to send out welcome letters to all of the families that they serve, and that students with IEPs are included in PTA newsletter lists, that they're included in your email lists, and that you are present during back to school night, that you are visibly there in any of your special education designated classrooms. And then some schools like to calendar out their IEP meetings for the school year, or at least have an idea of which meetings should occur in each month, and have your special education staff begin to reach out to parents to schedule those in order of due dates. Okay. So during the school year, progress reports for student IEPs must go home around the same time as report cards. And it's also your responsibility to make sure that IEP meetings are held on time, making sure that requests for assessments are received by your special education staff, and letting your general education staff know in all staff meetings about their responsibility to notify you or a special education staff member when there is a request for assessment. Again, making sure that records requests during the year are sent out within 5 days, And most importantly, making sure that your students with IEPs are included in all social activities and extracurricular activities. Making sure that any notice about a school dance or clubs or field trips or sports go home with all of your students, and that information in the newsletter is sent home to all of your students, regardless if they have an IEP or not. And then finally, at the end of the school year, this is when we have a lot of IEPs. These are called transition IEPs. Depending on your grade level, preschool to kindergarten. So your little ones, 5th grade to 6th grade. So from elementary school to middle school, 8th grade to 9th grade, middle school to high school, as well as if you have any students that are graduating high school with a diploma, and then students that are continuing through transition age through the age of 22. So sometimes this involves coordinating with different schools and sometimes different districts. And it's very important that these meetings happen so that parents have the information that they need for their child. Again, making sure that you're including students who receive special education services in all commencement and promotion activities, making sure that your commencement and promotion activities are accessible. So, for example, having ASL interpretation, making sure that there are ramps or that everything is on one level so that students who utilize wheelchairs are able to get around during any type of activity. And just making sure, again, that you are facilitating a welcoming and belonging environment in your schools. All right. Serve as an administrator during an IEP meeting. So most administrators don't come with a very robust special education background. Whenever I meet an administrator who was a special education teacher, I will call them my unicorns because they have served as a case manager. And so they know what roles that they have to play. But we're going to talk a little bit about what your role is as the administrator during meetings. So before IEP meetings, making sure that all of your school team are able to attend. If you have a team member who is not able to attend part or all of the meeting, either you or the case manager needs to reach out to the family to get permission. And they need to sign an excusal form, which is part of the IEP document. If the parent does not permit someone from missing some or all of the meeting, that meeting must be rescheduled. It is, is not the right word, but it is a error and also illegal when an IEP team comes together and someone says, oh, I'm only able to be here for 15 minutes. Can I be excused for the rest of the meeting? I've been in so many meetings like that, and it puts parents in a very confrontational position. because most parents don't want to say no in the moment, but especially that general ed teacher, they have valuable information about the child that is important for the entire meeting. We'll get a little bit more about like what happens in the meeting. But first, before the meeting, depending on how large your school is, you may not know every student that is at your school site, and that's okay. But if you are the administrator at an IEP meeting, it is essential that you observe that student and put eyes on that student before the meeting. Because it's also part of your responsibility to be part of the conversation, to know what that student likes, what their strengths are, what their areas of need are. And again, that means going into the special ed database, glancing at their IEP, having an idea of what services they receive, and then ensuring that proper interpretation is secured prior to the meeting. So sometimes that is done through the district office. If you are a small school district, sometimes your administrative assistant or secretary is the one that secures that interpreter. But you should know who to contact for either a Spanish interpreter, a Portuguese interpreter, an ASL interpreter. That is a procedural right that parents have to be able to participate in the meetings. The most important thing during the IEP meeting is to be present. If you are helping taking IEP notes, absolutely you can be on your computer assisting with them. Please do not multitask during an IEP meeting. Because if a question is asked of you and you look up and, what? Parents are going to think that your child is not important. Through our actions, we can demonstrate to parents how important we believe that their child is. So you can write your reports later on. Also, utilizing your privilege in making sure that parents have an opportunity to ask questions, gauging visually if parents are understanding the information that is being presented. We've all been in meetings where we can tell when someone's eyes are just glazed over and they have no idea what's going on, but they'll nod and they'll say yes. And that is where we have to poke our staff a little bit and say, can you explain that again? And rephrase it. Make sure that we're not using acronyms in meetings because they are very inaccessible to families. And again, pushing back on language that is deficit-based. So if you have a staff member who is saying, well, they can't do this, and they won't do this, and they refuse to do this, and I just can't get them. What is the student able to do? What do they like? What do they prefer? Let's flip the conversation so that it's focused on assets-based language. And it's completely okay to say, you know what, that's ableist. We don't use that language here. setting it down in a way that parents see that we are on their side. And then that's a conversation that you need to have with your staff later on. But if we are the models of that positive assets-based language, that is the most powerful way that parents are going to see that we are partnering with them effectively. And then finally, making sure that parents are not pushed or coerced to sign for consent right away. A lot of times, parents need to review documents before they sign something. I need to review things again before I sign something. We don't need to have consent at the end of the meeting, but we need to check in with parents and ask if there are any questions if it's becoming 3, 4, 5 days after the meeting. This is a very important decision for them that impacts their time. And then after the IEP meeting, ensuring that all documentation is translated for parents. So right now, legally, schools do not have to translate documents for parents before the meeting. Personally, I think we need to do a better job with that. But I also know that that translation of documents is costly, especially if we need to make edits and revisions. There was a state bill that was just signed last month by Governor Newsom in California that provides more protection for families with documentation translation. It still doesn't say that parents must have translated documents at the meeting. So we need to keep fighting for that. But if a parent speaks, reads, and writes Spanish, those documents need to be translated. So connect with whatever service or department does that at the district office to get that done. Because if parents are not able to read and comprehend the documents, how are we expecting them to sign for consent? And then, after the IEP meeting, if you need to have check-ins with any of your staff, if you noticed that either their behavior or their use of language was something that you wanted to document or correct, make sure that you are going through the proper means of that, however your human resources department has that outlined for you. It doesn't always have to be a written warning. I think we have to assume positive intent. So maybe it's just, checking in with someone and saying, hey, I noticed this. Next time, can you please use language such as? And then follow up after the next meeting. If they've corrected their behavior, appreciate them and acknowledge them. And if not, then follow any type of discipline procedures. So we are at the question and answer section. So I know that we might have some questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Kristin, for sharing with us this information. It is absolutely important and vital. I see Andrew has his hand up, so why don't we give Andrew a chance to ask that question?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask Kristin, as an administrator, uh, I have a question about the timing of IEP meetings. Are most IEP meetings after school? And if they are, we've had a lot of situations, even in where I'm at now, where we don't we have difficulty with getting administrators to those meetings because of other things that are going on campus, such as there's a fight, it just could be a number of different things. So what's your take on that when administrators maybe are late to an IEP meeting, aren't able to get to the IEP meeting, and if vice principals or principals aren't able to go to an IEP meeting, who are the next people in line that might be able to go? I guess that's my
Yeah,
question.
that's a great question. Um, Different schools and different school districts will hold their IEP meetings. Um, it's different practices. And I think a lot of times those practices are dictated by the contract that the teachers and certificated professionals have with the school district. Um, I have seen contracts where it is very clearly stated that all meetings must happen during the school day. I've also seen contracts that preserve the school day as time of learning and that all meetings such as this need to happen after the contracted day with the expectation that teachers are time parted further. So it really depends. Um, and yeah, I just acknowledging that administrators wear so many hats and have so many things that they are pulled into. You can designate if you have guidance counselors that have what's called a PPS or pupil uh, pupil service credential. If either a guidance counselor or a school psychologist can serve as the administrator at an IEP meeting, with one exception. If the school psychologist is also reporting on an assessment, they cannot act as the administrative designates because they would be wearing two different hats. So I would make sure that your guidance counseling team, or if you have a dean, or even a department chair for the special ed department, um, any of your teachers that have a preliminary admin credential can also act as an administrative designee. So that might be a really good thing to know at the beginning of the year who your kind of chain of command is. So if Andrew is scheduled to go to this meeting, but you're dealing with disciplining a student and are unable to go, obviously try and delegate that task. But if you're not able to do that, um, find someone else who is able to step in. Um, an administrator is required to be at the IEP for the entire time. So if an admin is not available, unfortunately, that would have to be something where the meeting would have to be rescheduled. So I think it's knowing your team, knowing what credentials they hold, and yeah, just knowing what their bandwidth is and their comfort level.
Thank you, Andrew, for that question. And that this is a good segue to something you mentioned earlier, and it made me wonder. You mentioned that when you see administrators or assigned to do the process, that very rarely do you see someone who has an idea about special education. And so that kind of makes me wonder, what can schools do to train their administrators? Is there a designated like courses and stuff they can offer, or how would that work?
Yeah. So knowing from my own administrative credentialing journey, there's not one class that is kind of special education 101. Like I was talking before about those unicorns. That is someone who was a former special education teacher or a school psychologist who gets their administrative credential and then becomes an assistant principal or a principal. I was a former special education teacher. I got my administrative credential. I continued working in the special education department. So, and site administration is not something that I had wanted to do. It was kind of my choice. I think that districts can absolutely support all of their site administrators as well as their designees in making sure that there is professional development time at the beginning of the year for the special ed department to very explicitly tell them like what their roles and responsibilities are. Or another thing would be that, they can connect with someone like CoFusion and we can come in and we can do that for them. But yeah, it's absolutely essential because I've been in meetings both as a teacher and as a special ed admin where that site admin did not have the knowledge that they needed. And it puts them in a very awkward position, but it also really jeopardizes the entire IEP process because that administrator isn't able to answer specific questions.
All right, I want to open up the floor for anyone who has a question. I don't want to hog the conversation.
And this is Dr. Rems Mario. I'm Dr. Julie Rems Mario, and I agree with Maha and with you as well. And we haven't discussed this enough. You're right. I just had an administration degree. I just did that work, and I hadn't had a degree before that at all. I haven't done that work at all. So before we can shut down that ableist language, when you said that, I really appreciated that. And I would love to have a future workshop where we could practice recognizing ableist language and how to respond to that and how to reframe it and how to use reframing. Because oftentimes during an IEP meeting, when there's ableist language that's being used, people are stymied. They don't know what to do. It's very awkward for them. They don't have the tools to respond and shut that down. So I do appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, a lot of times disability is kind of left out of that conversation. And that's an unfortunate misstep that I think a lot of our districts and even just our higher ed institutions, they fail to take notice that disability is also an extremely important piece of that. So I'm glad that resonated with you.
All right, does anyone have a question before I jump in with another one?
Yes, we see someone here.
I can see somebody over who could spotlight Amanda. I see somebody here. Hi. Amanda saying hello.
Hi.
Did you have a question or a comment, Amanda?
No, I didn't. Did I like wave and get someone's attention?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, do you want to take the opportunity now to ask a question?
I'm just taking it all in. Thank you.
Thank
I'm in agreement with what everybody's saying. My experience as an educator is, the IEP team, all of the people involved. It's really challenging to bring everybody and include them at the same time, place, whether it's, virtual or, out of school. And then to add parents, it's a lot. And I think that with teacher contracts, that's really the part right now because inclusion is such a big deal right now in schools. There's many, many students. So I really do agree with what everyone is saying. It is challenging. I find the teachers are more, it's more challenging to set that up, the IEP setting that up, compared to administrators. I feel like there's often more administrators, middle schools, high schools. But yeah, teachers, educators, it's really challenging even to get one to come the whole time. Yeah.
Thank you for those comments, Amanda, which really brings a good question
It's good. Thank you.
uh, uh, about if very hard to get teachers involved, and I'm sure there is issues with like their working hours, union obligations, and all the other stuff that are involved. And so, as a school, what would be ways to you, in your opinion, that can mitigate something like that? Like, how do we go around all these different obligations that kind of stop teachers from being able to be even more involved?
Yeah, well, I
Yeah,
think as site
sorry.
administrators, we need to be advocates for our teachers and making sure that they get compensated for the work that they do. Um, and just acknowledging and being very open and real with all of the commitments that they have. But I think it is something setting the tone at the beginning of the school year, at all staff meetings, that all students are our students. There's no such thing as those kids. All of our kids are all of our kids. And yeah, I know that there are different clubs that particular schools and districts have engaged in. Um, Best Buddies, which is a um, kind of sister organization to Special Olympics, has belonging clubs in elementary, middle, and high schools that are co-facilitated by a special education staff member and a general education staff member. And it's that they share the responsibilities of running the club and facilitating the club. So I think it's setting the expectation that these are not extra things, that these are just things that we are obligated to do as part of our ethical responsibility as educators. But yeah, I wish I could solve that problem. But yes, rule number one, pay teachers more and recognize that. And paraeducators.
Thank you for that advice. One last question that I have, and I found it very curious that you mentioned independent education evaluation, the IAE, the parents have the right to request an outside evaluation. And then the other thing you mentioned was family empowerment centers where they can help in parents to provide them support. And as a parent who had a kid and been in many, many IEPs, I've never heard of those two options. And so I'm wondering, like, is this legally required to be mentioned in these meetings, or is just one of those things that they write in documents and you hoping that, not hoping, but it's you and your luck and whether you're paying attention to what is written in the documents?
Oh, yeah. Andrew can attest to this because he and I actually worked together when we were both teachers. When I was a resource specialist and he was a general ed teacher in middle school. So I've known Andrew for like over 10 years. The procedural safeguards, like I said, are 19 pages long in 12 or 14 point font, and schools are obligated to hand them to parents. And then sometimes we say, hey, do you have any questions about that? But in the moment. So I'm sure that you might have received a copy of your parent rights, but no one goes over what those rights look like. And family empowerment centers are relatively new. That was part of the last revision of the procedural safeguards in 2022, I believe. They're updated like every 8 or 9 years. So that part might not have been in there, but an independent educational evaluation has always been a part of it. But yeah, it's just here you go. If you have any questions, please contact us. What schools and districts can do is they can host parent nights where parent rights are explained and broken down. And someone at a district level might think, well, that's actually just going to mean that we're going to have more litigation and more parents complaining. When in fact, that transparency and that accountability to the families that we serve in the long run will be dividends just for empowering parents, but also for ensuring that kids get the services that they're, you know, required to receive under federal law. And I don't know a district that does that. But again, that's something that CoFusion could do. We could partner with districts and have those nights where we explain to parents what their rights are. We just need districts to be okay with that because, you know, more questions are going to come up as a result. Yes.
Sheila, your microphone's.
Okay. Okay, so the information for deaf children and deaf students and their parents is different than for special ed as well. For example, the family resource centers don't really specialize in deaf people. So there are other parent organizations that can support the parents of deaf children as well. So often when families go to the public schools, they don't know about that, and the public schools don't know about that. And so they can get advocacy services from deaf centers and agencies like NorCal Services for Deaf in Sacramento or DCARA here in the Bay Area, and Deaf and Hard of Hearing Community Center in Fresno. So there are so many things that are not in the written information, so that families have to go through a whole journey because they don't know the resources they have right under their noses. So it's important to see those changes.
Yeah. And the statement about in the procedural safeguards about the state schools for the deaf and the blind, it just says there are state schools for the deaf and the blind.
Or nothing. They say nothing pretty much.
Exactly. I mean, it just says, hey, they're here, but it doesn't go into explaining the pros and the cons of, you know, deaf education versus having a student who is deaf or blind included in a general education setting. And that is a whole nother, you know, hour and a half that we could talk to.
I wanted to
Absolutely, yes. Amanda?
One of the things that I do is for the, you know, the re-eligibilities every year, feel old school, the triennials. I actually add that information in my report. Like I specifically add it. So at least every 3 years, the families in that eligibility report are seeing that. Like I pull out right from that packet that's very specific to that student, right? So I just think that the families really look at that and they really appreciate that. And I see more follow through because I have to review the report at the IEP meeting. So I have everyone's audience. It's great.
Thank you, Amanda, for doing that. And thank you,
Wonderful.
Dr. Kristin. The conversation is very rich. We have a lot to discuss and we have a lot to continue to work on. And so I want to take this opportunity for you joining us tonight to let you know that at CoFusion Group, we are starting a new program where we collaborate with schools in providing them the support that they need in the areas that they feel they can need support. So I encourage you to look at our website to get information and connect with us. As a nonprofit organization, we definitely want to work with schools to make transformative change. Well, if nobody has any questions or comments, I want to thank you for coming and joining us this evening in this conversation. And I want to thank Dr. Kristin Vogel-Campbell for graciously agreeing to share the knowledge and the experience with us. I also want to thank our interpreters for volunteering their time to help us in translating for us. And most of all, I want to thank each one of you who joined us tonight. You could have been doing other things this evening, but you chose to be with us to increase your knowledge. So thank you so much. It's educators like you who keep us going and keep us wanting to improve our services at CoFusion Group. So thank you all for coming tonight, and have a blessed and a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.